Welcome to the anime mind, where thought moves quietly through shadow, and even in stillness, something within you begins to stir. Tonight, we enter the mind of Light Yagami through the cold, severe clarity of Thomas Hobbes, and ask a simple question with a terrible answer. What happens when one person decides that his judgment should stand above every law, every institution, every human limit? Death Note gives one answer again and again. When one person becomes the law, order does not save the world. It begins to rule it like a tyrant. The most dangerous moment in Death Note is not the first death. It is the first time Light Yagami decides that the notebook does not merely give him power, but gives him the right to judge. From the beginning, the series places four things in Light's hands at once: intelligence, boredom, disgust, and a weapon. He is brilliant, admired, disciplined, and already strangely removed from the world around him. Teachers praise him, classmates respect him. His future appears secure, and yet his expression is often empty, as if success itself has become tedious. The problem is not that Light has been denied a place in society. The problem is that he has begun to feel above it. He looks at the world and sees corruption, stupidity, delay, weakness. Some of that judgment is fair. Death Note never pretends the world is clean, but in Light, that perception is mixed with something colder: contempt. He does not just think the world is damaged, is beneath him. That inner posture matters because the Death Note lands in the hands of someone who is already prepared to believe that his judgment is unusually pure. The notebook falls into the school courtyard almost casually, as if history changes without announcing itself. Light picks it up after class. A black cover, simple rules. If you know a person's face and write their name, they die. No ceremony, no witnesses, no institution. The power is immediate and private. That simplicity is what makes it so disturbing. The notebook removes every visible part of justice except decision. No arrest, no trial, no defense, no public reasoning. Only one hidden person choosing and another person dying. In ordinary law, judgment has to move through procedures because society assumes something humbling but necessary. No individual, however intelligent, should be allowed to act on certainty alone. Light receives a tool that flatters the opposite belief. His first response is disbelief, but even his disbelief is revealing. He does not recoil first from the moral obscenity of such power. He tests it. He reads the rules, checks the logic, and asks whether it works. On television, a hostage taker threatens children and teachers inside a kindergarten. Police seem helpless. The crisis unfolds as public fear and institutional weakness. Light writes the man's name. 40 seconds later, the man dies. That first killing is carefully chosen. Light does not begin with someone ambiguous. It begins with someone almost everyone is ready to condemn. That matters because it gives him a moral alibi. He can tell himself he has not committed murder. He has intervened where institutions failed. He has done what weak authorities could not do. The first death is not only proof that the notebook works, it is the beginning of Light's self-authorization. This is where Hobbes becomes precise. Hobbes believed that human beings do not live peacefully by instinct. Left to private fear, pride, and self-protection, they slide toward conflict. In Leviathan, he argues that peace requires a common power strong enough to overawe everyone and stop private violence from becoming ordinary life. But the key word is common. Hobbes does not say that whoever can impose order therefore has the right to rule. He says people need a public authority that stands above private judgment. Law exists to replace personal vengeance, not perfect it. Light sees the same disorder Hobbes feared, but he draws the exact wrong conclusion. He does not think society needs stronger institutions. He thinks, I should become the institution. And from that moment, the central movement of Death Note is set. A young man begins by wanting order and ends by making himself the source of law. Once that happens, order stops being peace. It becomes tyranny. The series makes this clear with Light's second killing. After the hostage incident, he is shaken. He paces, sweats, and tries to absorb what he has done. Sees a man harassing a woman on the street. This time there is no national emergency, no televised crisis, no dramatic rescue. It is simply a moment of ugliness in ordinary life. Light writes the man's name. Again, the man dies. This second death matters more than the first. The first can still be narrated as rescue. The second reveals the real seduction of the notebook. It gives Light portable sovereignty. He can enforce his will anywhere, at any scale, for any offense he personally decides is intolerable. Justice no longer requires public necessity. It only requires his attention. That is the turning point. The notebook is not a tool for rare emergencies. It is a machine for turning private judgment into final sentence. What excites Light is not only that evil can be punished. It is that punishment can now move as fast as his own thought. He sees, decides, writes, and the world changes. No delay, no disagreement, no one else involved. Procedure exists because human beings are fallible and partial. Procedure slows judgment down, so that one mind cannot become absolute. Light experiences those limits as weakness. The notebook tells him that his impatience is purity. Death Note is especially sharp here, because Light's temptation is not crude. He is not merely drunk on power in the childish sense. He is relieved by a power that perfectly matches the image he already has of himself. He believes he sees more clearly than others. He believes institutions are slow because they compromised. The notebook tells him that his judgment does not need correction, only reach. That is why his dissent feels plausible instead of melodramatic. Tyranny often begins with a real grievance. The moral error is not failing to see suffering. It is believing that because the problem is real, any restraint on solving it must be cowardice. Light begins to treat hesitation as guilt. If he can stop harm and does not, then restraint itself starts to feel immoral. That is a dangerous thought because it turns every limit on power into an enemy of justice. Hobbes sharpens this point even more. In addition to fear and self-preservation, he says human beings are driven by competition, diffidence, and glory. That last motive matters for Light. Glory for Hobbes is not just vanity in the shallow sense. It is the desire to be acknowledged, to stand above others, to have one's superiority recognized. Light does want a safer world, but he also wants authorship. He does not merely want crime reduced. He wants to be the one who reduced it. He wants order, but stamped with his own mind. That is why his isolation matters. Light is not lonely because nobody sees his worth. Everyone sees it. He is lonely because excellence has become part of his armor. Other people do not feel like companions in a shared world. They feel like slower participants in a world he evaluates. The notebook enters exactly there. It does not just give him power, it gives him a role grand enough to justify him. Is distance from everyone else. When Ryuk appears in his room, Light adjusts almost immediately. A Shinigami rises from the shadows, all teeth and amusement, and Light, after the first shock, begins asking questions. He studies rules, he organizes the impossible. Even the supernatural becomes manageable once it can be turned into a system. That response is chilling because it shows how ready he was. He does not collapse under the weight of what he has found. He starts planning. Soon he is sitting at his desk at night, writing names under the glow of his lamp while the rest of the house sleeps. The scene is quiet, repetitive, almost studious. That image matters. Death Note makes mass killing look like disciplined homework. Light is most frightening not when he is emotional, but when he is composed. Calm does not soften what he is doing. It makes it colder. Then he says it plainly. He will create a new world, and he will become its god. The line lands because the series has earned it. By then, Light no longer sees himself as someone using monstrous means for limited ends. He sees himself as the source from which justice should flow. Law is no longer above him. It has been pulled inside him. What he approves becomes right. What he condemns becomes disposable. This is exactly where Hobbes must be used carefully. Hobbes wanted a sovereign, because he feared the disaster that follows when private people claim the right to punish on personal judgment. But a Hobbesian sovereign is public, legible, and political. It is not a hidden student with a supernatural weapon and no accountability. Light recreates the very condition Hobbes wanted to overcome. He turns judgment back into private will, except now private will can reach anyone, anywhere. The war of all against all does not disappear. It is concentrated into one person's unchecked authority. And once one person becomes the law, the logic of tyranny is already alive. If Light's judgment is justice, then disagreement is no longer disagreement. It becomes resistance to justice itself. Delay becomes corruption. Criticism becomes evil. Mercy becomes weakness. He does not need to begin by loving cruelty. He only needs to believe that his purpose is too important to be limited by anyone else. That is why the early episodes feel so cold. We are not watching a simple corruption story in which a good person is seduced by obvious evil. We are watching someone convert moral disgust into permission, then permission into identity. Light sees institutional failure and concludes that his own certainty is enough to replace law. The notebook gives him force, but the deeper transformation is philosophical. He stops seeing society as a shared human problem and starts seeing it as material to be arranged by superior judgment. The notebook does not create Light's deepest desire, it exposes it. Beneath his brilliance is a wish not merely to punish evil, but to stand beyond judgment himself. R.S. Most. The perfect student finds a God's notebook, and the first thing he loses is not innocence but proportion. After that, every human limit begins to look small, next to his mission. Tyranny no longer feels like tyranny to him. It feels like clarity. And that is the warning Death Note offers, sharpened by Hobbes. When one person becomes the law, order does not defeat violence. It gives violence a single righteous face. The change begins almost invisibly. A criminal appears on television, and then he dies. Then another dies, then more. News programs begin reporting the same pattern again and again. Sudden heart failure. Investigators notice that the deaths cluster around people whose names and faces have been made public. Hostage takers, fugitives, convicted offenders, suspects already in custody. Someone is selecting targets. Someone is punishing without arrest, defense, verdict, or appeal. No court has spoken, yet judgment is happening all the same. What makes this frightening is also what makes it easy to accept at first. Light does not begin by killing random strangers. He begins with people most viewers are ready to condemn. Death Note is careful about that. It starts where resistance is weakest. If brutal criminals die and the public feels safer, what has really been lost? The series understands that tyranny rarely presents itself as tyranny. It arrives looking useful. You can feel this in the early task force scenes. Soichiro Yagami and the others confront report. From around the world. Crime rates appear to be falling. Polls suggest that many ordinary people support Kira. Some admire him openly. Others speak with uneasy gratitude, as if fear itself has begun to look protective. These are not foolish people in the room. They are police officers who have seen violence closely. They know the appeal of swift punishment. That is why these scenes matter. Support for Kira does not grow out of madness. It grows out of exhaustion, from the familiar frustration with loopholes, delays, weak enforcement, and visible failure. Soichiro's reaction matters, because he feels that pressure without surrendering to it. He is not soft about crime, but he understands something Light does not. Procedure is not a technical obstacle placed in front of justice. Procedure is what prevents punishment from becoming personal vengeance. The drop in crime is discussed almost like a fact that could settle the argument. But Death Note keeps another fact in view. No one knows who Kira is. No one knows his standards except through the bodies he leaves behind. No one can challenge him, correct him, or be sure he is right. The world grows quieter only because it has been placed beneath the shadow of an executioner no one can call to account. This is where Hobbes becomes especially specific. He is often reduced to a blunt idea. People are dangerous, so they need strong authority. But Hobbes does not defend rule by whoever is most powerful or most certain. People escape chaos by authorizing a common power to act in their name. The sovereign exists because individuals give up the right to be judges in their own cause. Law begins there, not with private certainty, but with a recognized authority standing above private wills. Light destroys exactly that distinction. He sees a frightened society and concludes that if one person can impose order, that person has the right to rule. But Hobbes's sovereign is not merely a successful enforcer. The whole point of sovereignty is that it replaces private judgment with public judgment. Light does the opposite. He takes his own moral reactions and treats them as law. The series makes this especially clear when Light sees reports about Kira's growing influence. Some people praise Kira, others fear him. Light interprets both as confirmation. If the public approves, he takes that as proof that he is just. If the public trembles, he takes that as proof that he is necessary. Either way, he reads reaction as legitimacy. This is one of the most revealing parts of his mind. He has built a way of thinking that cannot be corrected from the outside. That is how tyranny thinks. It treats outcomes as permission. Hobbes would reject that substitution. For him, punishment is not just harm inflicted on the guilty. It is an act of public authority. Admiration is not authorization. Fearful gratitude is not a social contract. A population can adjust to terror without ever consenting to it. Himself acts first, and then treats the world's relief and fascination as if they were retroactive consent. But consent does not work backward. This is the center of Death Note's political insight. Light creates order, but it is the order of unilateral judgment. His victims do not stand before a known authority. They stand before an invisible chooser. Even if his standards look consistent at first, they remain private because no law defines them and no institution administers them. Only Light sees the whole system because the system is only his will. That is why the peace he creates is so thin. It is not the peace of citizens living under a shared legal order. It is the silence produced by exposure to arbitrary death. People thank Kira, but they also speak as if he might already be listening. Their gratitude is saturated with caution. They do not trust him in the civic sense. They adapt to him. Light mistakes that adaptation for moral improvement. He sees fewer crimes and imagines a better humanity. But fear often changes behavior without changing character. A person who stops acting because he fears invisible punishment has not necessarily become just. He has become careful. Hobbes is useful here because he never claims that political order makes people virtuous. Its purpose is humbler and harsher, to secure peace through stable public authority. Light wants something more absolute. He does not want merely to restrain violence. He wants to cleanse the world. Ansing becomes the aim. The category of who deserves punishment cannot stay fixed. It widens. The anime shows that widening clearly. Once Light identifies himself with justice, anyone who opposes him can be recast as an enemy of justice. Investigators become obstacles. Critics become threats. Innocence itself becomes unstable, because what matters most is no longer what someone has done, but whether they stand in the way of Kira's world. That is the real danger in letting one person become the law. Tyranny does not only punish the guilty too harshly, it gradually redefines guilt to include resistance. The trap is simple. A man appears on television claiming to be L. He looks into the camera and calls Kira evil. He says the killings are murder. Light is watching alone in his room in Kanto. He hears the accusation, writes the name Lind L. Taylor, and watches the man die on live television. At first, it looks like victory. Someone challenged Kira, and now that person is dead. But then the real L speaks. The dead man was only a prisoner used as bait. The broadcast was shown only in the Kanto region. Kira has just revealed that he needs a name and a face, and that he is somewhere nearby. Light tried to erase a threat, and instead exposed himself to one. This scene matters because it reveals Light faster than any speech could. He says he is cleansing the world. He says he is punishing evil. But when someone publicly condemns him, he does not investigate, hesitate, or tolerate the judgment. He kills the person who named him. For Light, the first enemy is not the criminal. It is the witness. Hobbes helps here because he understood why private judgment is so dangerous. Human beings are easily threatened, quick to take offense, and prone to confuse wounded pride with moral necessity. When Lind L. Taylor calls Kira evil, Light does not respond like an impersonal judge. He responds like an offended man. The accusation touches his pride, and his pride immediately becomes punishment. In one movement, criticism becomes a capital offense. That is why this scene strips away his mask so quickly. Before L's challenge, Light can still imagine himself as cold and rational, a surgeon cutting away diseased parts of society. But once he is interpreted from the outside, that self-image cracks. The mission is no longer simply to punish criminals. It becomes a defense of Light Yagami's superiority against public judgment. This is where his psychology becomes especially clear. Light cannot allow another mind to stand outside him and name what he is doing. If L can call Kira a murderer and remain alive, then Light is no longer the sole author of moral reality. Another person has entered the world with a rival interpretation. That is what Light cannot bear. He does not only want to punish wrongdoers, he wants his own judgment to be final, uncontested, beyond reply. So he kills the reply. There is vanity in this, but it is more severe than ordinary vanity. his goodness to be unquestionable because his whole project depends on it. If Kira can be seen as anything other than justice, then the killings lose their sacred frame and become what they are: executions carried out by a hidden stranger. L forces that possibility into public view. He says plainly, "This is murder." That is why the scene cuts so deeply. Light is not only threatened, he is interpreted. Hobbes's sovereign is supposed to end personal quarrels, not universalize one person's quarrels into law. Light does the opposite. He takes his own anger, gives it lethal force, and calls that justice. He is not building a public order, he is using violence to erase contradiction. From that moment on, the conflict changes shape. L becomes the person who saw through him. The detective matters because he refuses the awe Light's power demands. He looks at Kira's killings and does not see a savior. He sees a murderer with a god complex and enough power to indulge it. Light can tolerate criminals because criminals justify his role. He cannot tolerate a witness who understands him. That is why his language of justice grows thinner, even while he keeps speaking it. He says he wants order, but he rejects everything that makes order lawful rather than tyrannical: evidence, defense, accountability, restraint. He says he is judging evil, but he kills Taylor not for any crime committed in that moment, but for speaking against Kira on television. In Light's world, the unforgivable act is not always violence. It is the act of naming the ruler from the outside. That is the structure of tyranny. It begins when another person's judgment becomes intolerable. Once one man treats his own conscience as law, disagreement starts to look like sabotage. A critic becomes an enemy. A witness becomes a threat. Scrutiny begins to feel like rebellion. There is something deeply unsettling in how quickly Light hardens after this. A healthier mind might ask, why did that accusation provoke me so completely? Light asks a different question. How do I destroy the person who exposed me? He does not examine his pride. He turns it into principle. This is one of the ways self-deception becomes political. A person acts from wounded vanity, then enlarges his cause until punishing the critic sounds noble. This logic continues when Light stands beside his father in task force headquarters, wearing the face of a reliable son. That is the deeper injury in this stretch of Death Note. Not just that Light kills, but that he kills from inside the structures meant to resist him. He listens to briefings, reads case files, offers measured insights, and uses the trust of lawful people as cover for private execution. A killer on the street threatens lives. A killer inside the house of law threatens the conditions that make law possible. Hobbes was not only afraid of open bloodshed, he was afraid of what happens when no stable common authority can be trusted. Without that, promises weaken. Expectations become uncertain. People stop knowing where judgment comes from or what can protect them. Light says he is creating order. In truth, he is creating the kind of hidden fear that makes real order impossible. That becomes brutally clear with Naomi Misora. Naomi is tearful, intelligent, grieving, and still lucid enough to see what others have missed about Ray Penber's death. She approaches police headquarters to do what a responsible person should do. She brings critical information to the proper place. Then she meets Light. The scene is horrifying because Light does not rush her. He reads her. He notices her caution, her intelligence, and the vulnerability grief has opened in her. He introduces himself as Soichiro Yagami's son. That single fact gives him borrowed authority. He sounds safe before he has earned any trust at all. Naomi hesitates and withholds her real name. That matters. It shows her instincts are sound. Even in grief, she is trying to preserve a basic rule of civic life. Do not surrender dangerous information to someone just because he appears respectable. Light presses gently, adjusting his tone, offering plausible reasons, waiting for caution to tire. When she finally tells him her name, Naomi Misora, the whole scene turns on that small act of trust. Light writes it down. From then on, the horror is quiet. He walks beside her knowing she is already dead. Nothing in the scene is loud. That is what makes it so cruel. A woman disappears because for a few minutes, she trusted the wrong person in the shadow of law. Light uses politeness as a weapon. He uses his father's reputation as disguise. He uses the setting of law enforcement itself to make murder easier. Hobbes would have seen the danger immediately. Peace depends not only on force, but on assurance. People need to believe that offices mean something, that procedures are not empty, that a person who presents himself through lawful roles is not secretly exercising private power. Once that assurance breaks, fear enters every ordinary interaction. Light's rule depends on exactly that breakdown. He can only remain supreme by making sincerity dangerous. That is why this is not just murder, it is usurpation. Light takes the place of law without accepting any of law's limits. Hobbes defended a strong sovereign because authority had to be public, known, and common to all. Light wants the opposite: absolute judgment without office, obedience without accountability, reverence without consent. He hides behind institutions while hollowing them out from within. The contrast with Soichiro makes this sharper. Soichiro is not naive. He knows what kind of enemy Kira is, but he still believes justice must move through evidence, restraint, and shared duty. He accepts frustration and risk because he refuses the idea that one man's private certainty should decide who lives and who dies. He represents a world in which authority is bound to responsibility. Light survives by feeding on that world. His father's integrity gives him cover. The task force's seriousness gives him access. Their willingness to trust one another gives him room to maneuver. This is where Hobbes is often misunderstood. He is not saying that any authority is better than disorder. He is saying authority must end the insecurity that makes common life impossible. When one person becomes the law according to his own will, insecurity returns. Naomi is innocent and dies. Soichiro is loyal and deceived. The task force is intelligent and still manipulated. Everyone lives under judgments they cannot see, challenge, or predict. That is the psychology of tyranny. It does not only kill opponents, it poisons the ordinary bonds by which people live together. It teaches that appearances may be traps, that institutions may already be occupied by the thing they claim to resist, that affection can be exploited, and that honesty may expose you to destruction. After Naomi's death, the world of Death Note feels colder because a basic social expectation has been broken, that if you bring truth to the proper door will not kill you. There is a particular stillness in Death Note when Light asks to be confined. No dramatic music, no eruption, only procedure tightening around him. Misa falls under suspicion. L keeps pressing. The task force hesitates between evidence and loyalty. Then Light calmly says that if he might be Kira, he should be treated like a suspect, too. He agrees to confinement. And when he gives up ownership of the notebook, he gives up the memories attached to it. What follows is painful for a very specific reason. In the cell, exhausted and watched, Light seems sincere. He does not demand trust. He does not posture. He says that if he truly is Kira, then he should remain confined until that is proven. He studies the case. He follows the evidence. He accepts limits. For a while, he lives as an ordinary subject under law. That stretch matters because it exposes the lie beneath his self-image. Without the notebook, Light does not become stupid or inert. He is still sharp, disciplined, persuasive. He can still think about justice. He can still work within procedures shaped by other people. He does not need to become Kira in order to matter in the world. That is devastating because it reveals that Kira was never a tragic necessity forced on him by the failures of society. He wanted the position. He wanted to decide without appeal. Hobbes helps make the point cleanly. Peace does not come from trusting individuals to follow their conscience. It comes from a common authority strong enough to stop each person from enforcing his own view of justice by force. The issue is not whether a person feels righteous. The issue is whether any private person can rightfully take the place of public law. Light under confinement proves he can live under limits. Kira exists not because limits make justice impossible, but because Light cannot bear limits on himself. This also clarifies the problem of innocence. Light always wants to believe that because his aim is good, his methods become clean. He wraps execution in the language of duty. Hobbes cuts through that excuse. A person does not become lawful because he feels justified. The question is not whether Light believes in his own purity. The question is whether one man can rightfully make his conscience do the work of law. Death Note answers no. Take away the notebook, and Light can still pursue criminals, still analyze evidence, still commit himself to justice. So Kira was never the necessary instrument of order. Kira was the form taken by Light's desire to rule order personally. The return of his memories lands with such force because the shift is immediate. He touches the notebook and the old arrangement snaps back into place. The face does not twist into madness. Something colder happens. Permission returns. And once that permission returns, procedure is discarded at once. Light does not hesitate between public justice and private execution. He goes back to private execution because absolute power has taught him to prefer it. That speed matters. It means the notebook did not implant an alien soul. It restored a relation to power that Light had already embraced. His morality was never stable apart from his impunity. Once he can become law again, he does. This is a hard psychological truth. And pure inside. But character is also revealed by structure. A restrained person may seem humane because restraint keeps his worst impulses from becoming action. Remove restraint, add certainty, add power, and the same person may become merciless without feeling false to himself. Light is terrifying for exactly that reason. He does not reject reason. He recruits reason into domination. That becomes even more painful in his relationship with Elle. Rain falls on the rooftop. Elle stands barefoot, thin and exhausted, and says the bells are loud today. Then he kneels and begins to wash Light's feet. The scene is unsettling because it is so gentle. Elle, who has spent the series suspecting Light, touches him with care. Light sits still and lets it happen. Whatever meanings gather around the scene, one thing is clear. Elle offers a form of human closeness Light cannot return. Elle sees him, not with worship, but with troubling intimacy. And Light accepts the gesture without ever stepping out of the role he has chosen. That matters because Light does not only want to defeat people. He wants to be recognized by someone intelligent enough to measure him correctly. Most people around him cannot do that. Misa worships him. Ryuk watches for amusement. The task force trusts him too easily or doubts him too weakly. But Elle sees him. That is why Light is drawn to him, and why he cannot allow him to live. The Yotsuba investigation briefly shows another possibility. With his memories gone, Light works best. Eyed Elle with energy and real focus. They compare deductions, challenge each other, and pursue Higuchi together. For a short while, the series lets us see what Light looks like when he is not trying to rule from above. He can work beside an equal. He can even seem to enjoy it. That is what makes Elle's death so bitter. Light does not kill only the man trying to expose him. He kills the one person who gave him a real alternative to ruling alone. Hobbes is useful here because he feared a world in which every serious dispute becomes a struggle of force, suspicion, and self-protection. Law matters because it stands above private preference. Elle, in his own way, defends that distinction. He insists that Kira must be answerable. He refuses to let brilliance become legitimacy. He keeps returning, in effect, to the same question: by what right? Light answers that question the way tyrants often do, not with argument, but with removal. His plan to kill Elle is especially cold because it uses a mother being's devotion as a mechanism. He understands Rem's love for Misa and arranges the pressure so that Rem must act. If Elle continues, Misa is endangered. If Misa is endangered, Rem will kill to protect her. When Watari dies and then Elle collapses, Light has not merely defeated an intellectual rival. He has authored a death while keeping his own hands clean. Elle dies in Light's arms, and that image is almost unbearable. Concern on Light's face. Collapse in Elle's body. Intimacy turned into cover. Person who might have forced Light to answer for himself dies while being held by the man who arranged it. With Elle gone, something larger disappears too, not just a detective, but a structure of resistance. Outwardly, order remains. Meetings continue. Procedures remain in place. But the center has been emptied. What remains is process without a real check on Light. The machinery is still running, but the one person strong enough to question its new master is gone. This is exactly where the core idea comes into focus. When one person becomes the law, order turns into tyranny, not because order itself is evil, but because law stops being law when it can no longer be challenged. Light creates a world in which punishment is immediate, fear is widespread, and opposition becomes almost impossible. To some, this looks like peace. Crime falls, people praise Kira, institutions hesitate to resist him. But this calm rests on terror and secrecy. No one chose it through public law. No one can appeal it. No one can summon its source and demand reasons. That is not Hobbesian order. Hobbes wanted a common power strong enough to end private conflict. Light creates the absolute triumph of private judgment. He is not ending the rule of personal will. He is making one person's will the center of the world. After L dies, one of the most unsettling changes in Death Note happens at a desk. Light takes L's place. He sits in the same chair, receives the same reports, directs the same task force. Hidden Executioner becomes the official face of the hunt for Kira. He is both the private criminal and the public guardian. What makes this so cold is not just the deception, but the closure of the system. The person committing the crime now controls the institution meant to detect it. A strange calm settles over that victory. Earlier, Light had to improvise constantly. After L's death, the pressure changes. The world grows quieter. Reports speak of falling crime. More people begin to treat Kira not as a murderer, but as a necessary force. Death Note does not present this world as openly apocalyptic. That would be too easy. Instead, it shows a world that seems relieved. Violence appears reduced, and in exchange, people accept life under the threat of unseen judgment. This is where Hobbes sharpens the distinction that matters most. Fear alone is not enough to make something lawful. Fear has to be tied to a public order. Light does not create such an order. He creates a society organized around the private possession of judgment. He chooses who lives and dies by his own standard, in secret, without procedure, without appeal, and without having to answer for error. That is not law, it is discretion. Once Light becomes the new L, correction nearly disappears. No court can review him. No public can question him. No subordinate can safely challenge him. People obey, but they do not obey laws they can know. They obey the possibility of death. That may produce stillness on the surface. But it cannot produce trust. It produces caution, silence, and managed behavior. Death Note shows this in the way people speak. Kira's authority rests not on office or constitution, but on spectacle and fear. His judgments are announced through deaths and public reaction. As his presence grows, speech contracts. Criticism becomes dangerous not because someone might disagree, but because someone might die. Praise spreads partly because many people believe in him, but also because approval becomes a way of staying safe. The result is a society that looks calm while inwardly tightening. That is the emptiness of Kira's peace. It is peaceful in the same way a room is peaceful when everyone inside knows not to say the wrong thing. Nothing explodes, but the calm depends on suppression. It is not held together by shared confidence in justice. It is held together by fear of invisible punishment. Light reads these results as proof that he was right. If crime falls, he assumes he is just. If people praise Kira, he treats praise as consent. Hobbes exposes the flaw. A sovereign is not justified merely because he is effective. Political authority must be public, common, and recognizable as law rather than preference. Once order depends on one hidden person's decisions, peace becomes another name for domination. The people around Light reveal this too. Kiyomi Takada gives Kira an articulate public face. She turns murder into moral rhetoric. L's sound like a new civic order, but her role is manufactured. She is not a partner in law. She is an instrument in propaganda. Light offers attention, significance, and intimacy only inside the boundaries of his plan. He does not meet her as a person with claims of her own. He arranges her. Teru Mikami shows the same logic in a more severe form. He is not simply loyal. He is devotional, rigid, absolute, nearly liturgical. He writes names as if carrying out sacred duty. Light chooses him for that reason. Mikami's discipline makes him useful, because it leaves almost no room for independent judgment. Hobbes wanted a sovereign to end the chaos of competing private judgments. Light turns one private judgment into the center of the world and recruits others to obey it absolutely. And yet this power is fragile. A lawful order can survive disagreement because it has procedures that do not depend on a single concealed mind. Light's order cannot survive friction. He needs Takada to speak, Mikami to act, the task force to trust, the public to fear, and everyone to see only a fragment. Everything leads back to one hidden point. If that point is exposed, the whole arrangement thins instantly. That is why the support for Kira feels numb rather than hopeful. Real peace leaves room for people to accuse, defend, argue, mourn, and be wrong without being destroyed. Kira's peace strips that room away. It does not reconcile citizens. It isolates them beneath the same threat. Almost difficult to read, because no one can know where conviction ends and self-protection begins. Nier and Mello enter precisely because Light's new world has made ordinary justice impossible. After L's death, the case does not pass cleanly to a stable successor. It splits. Nier works through law, distance, and analysis. Mello turns to crime, pressure, and force. They are not merely new detectives. They are evidence of a damaged order. If institutions still held, justice would not need to divide into these two forms. But Kira's hidden sovereignty has hollowed out normal channels. People now have to pursue truth from inside a world where truth itself can get you killed. Hobbes helps here too. The point of common authority is to stop private force and private judgment from taking over social life. Light claims to solve that problem, but in practice he drives it underground, where it becomes colder and more desperate. Nier responds with hyper-control. Mello responds with violent improvisation. Both are signs that Kira's order is not stable order at all. It is a world in which lawful confidence has already broken. This hidden corruption enters the home most painfully through Sayu Yagami's kidnapping. Sayu is not a strategist or symbol. She becomes leverage because the adults around her are trapped in a struggle governed by secrecy and terror. Her mother collapses into panic. Soichiro is torn between duty and fatherhood. Sayu survives, but not untouched. Aftermath linger. Something in her has retreated. That aftermath matters because Light's promised peace cannot protect the innocent closest to him. In fact, his hidden rule helps create the conditions that expose them. The kidnapping forces the task force into negotiations over the death note itself. The instrument Light used for perfect justice becomes a bargaining chip passed between frightened people under pressure. Hobbes would have seen the humiliation at once. The sovereign exists to prevent hostage logic, private coercion, and improvised violence. Kira's world runs on all three. Light's response to Sayu's suffering reveals how far he has gone. On the surface, he helps. Underneath, he calculates. What protects his identity? What preserves the notebook? What secures his future as Kira? The point is not that he feels nothing. The point is that every feeling has become secondary to the maintenance of private sovereignty. He cannot simply be a brother anymore because he has made himself something else first. Soichiro stands as the clearest contrast. He is not a genius on the level of L or Light, but he has steadiness. He believes law should mean the same thing in private that it means in public. He believes you should not become corrupt in the act of fighting corruption. In a world of notebooks, masks, and manipulation, that can seem almost old-fashioned. But it is one of the few stable moral positions left in the series. When he takes the Shinigami eyes during the raid to recover Seiyu and the notebook, the contrast between father and son becomes unbearable. Light avoids the eyes because he wants time. He wants the future of his reign. Soichiro accepts them because he is willing to shorten his own life to save his daughter and contain the damage. Both men come close to supernatural power. One approaches it as a burden for others. The other approaches it as a path to rule. Soichiro dies still trusting Light. That is one of the cruelest facts in Death Note. He never sees the truth. He dies believing in his son. That trust is not incidental. It is the final evidence of how private tyranny works. Light does not only destroy enemies, he feeds on the moral world built by people better than himself. He relies on his father's decency, his family's love, and the task force's trust while hollowing them out from within. This is why Hobbes remains so useful. He says peace requires a common authority strong enough to stop private violence, but common authority must be public and recognizable. People must know where judgment comes from. Kira offers the opposite: punishment without visible law, fear without accountable rule, obedience without consent. That is why Light's world cannot stabilize. Fear can suppress action, but it cannot create trust. It cannot sustain a political order that belongs to everyone. It can only subordinate them to one hidden will. By the time we reach the warehouse, that hidden will has to stand in the open, in a way that strips everyone down to fact. No throne room, no divine aura, only concrete fluorescent light and bodies gathered around evidence. For most of the series, Kira acts at a distance. Death arrives without a visible hand. Rumor and fear do half the work. But here the distance is gone. Light has to stand in public with Nier, the task force, Mikami, and the notebooks laid out before them. Nier's method is almost plain beside Light's self-dramatizing grandeur. He does not claim destiny. He arranges a trap that others can witness. He has Mikami's notebook replaced, then gathers everyone together so the truth can emerge in public. That matters philosophically, not just tactically. Hobbes's deepest concern is that authority cannot rest on "trust me," uttered by one superior person. Judgment has to be visible as something public, not magical, not private, not hidden behind one man's charisma. Nier restores in miniature that public scene of judgment. Mikami arrives certain of victory. He writes names carefully, expecting Nier, the task force, and the others to die within seconds. His faith is disciplined, not wild. He has given himself entirely to Kira's categories. Then nothing happens. No one falls. The appointed moment passes and the room remains still. That stillness destroys Kira more completely than any speech. His power always depended on the appearance that judgment and death were joined by necessity. Write the name and reality obeys. Nier breaks that aura with something humiliatingly ordinary, a switched notebook. The point is larger than strategy. Kira's divinity turns out to depend on paper, secrecy, and perfect coordination. A god can be undone by evidence work. Hobbes says people cannot be judges in their own cause. The phrase can sound technical, but its meaning is simple. If I judge my own case, my anger looks like justice, my pride looks like duty, and my interest looks like necessity. Light never gave that up. He expanded it until it covered the world. He decided who counted as criminal, who counted as obstacle, who counted as expendable, and then treated those decisions as objective law. That is the core of tyranny. One person's conscience starts acting like a court. The warehouse matters because Light can no longer hide inside the role of unseen judge. Once Mikami's notebook fails and Nier begins explaining, Light first reaches for the old mask, the helpful investigator, the innocent son, the brilliant young man being framed. But the room no longer belongs to his performance. The others are comparing facts with one another, not taking cues from him. That change is what he cannot bear. Light can judge others. He cannot tolerate being judged with them and by them. And the moment he is forced into the place of the accused, his real attitude becomes impossible to miss. He does not answer with humility. He answers with contempt. He speaks of fools. He speaks of cleansing the world. Leaved, ordinary people exist to be sorted by better ones. His breakdown is not a loss of character. It is the end of the disguise. This is where Hobbes becomes especially sharp about pride. A political order only works if no one gets to stand outside the rules and call his own appetite law. Light never saw himself as one citizen among others, or even as a ruler bound to an office. He saw himself as the exception who justified himself. He did not merely want power, he wanted exemption. That is why Nier's victory means more than the clever detective beating the clever criminal. It marks the return of a distinction Light erased. Being better at something is not the same as having rightful authority. Light is more intelligent than almost everyone around him. He mistakes that for a title. Hobbes would reject that immediately. Talent does not cancel partiality. The cleverest person is still vulnerable to self-love, fear, resentment, and the desire for glory. That is exactly why law cannot safely become identical with one exceptional person. The exposure in the warehouse humiliates Light because it forces him back into ordinary humanity. He bleeds, he panics, he begs, he tries to escape. The person who claimed the right to decide who deserved to live suddenly looks exactly like what he always was. A young man terrified of being judged by the same standard he imposed on others. And yet Light is not merely a hypocrite in the shallow sense. He believed himself more dangerous. He thought he was the only one willing to do what justice required. Vanity rarely appears inside the mind as vanity. It appears as duty, clarity, sacrifice. Light's disgust at crime and his desire to stand above everyone else grew together until he could no longer separate them. He wanted a cleaner world, but he also wanted to be the one who cleaned it. When Matsuda shoots him, something else becomes clear. Light is not struck down by an abstract force. He is shot by someone who trusted him. That matters. Matsuda's bullets are not only anger, they are wounded trust finally turning into judgment. Light spent the entire series feeding on trust while betraying it. He lied to the task force, used Misa's devotion, arranged Takata, deceived his father, and stood inside the very institutions he was emptying out. By the end, no relationship around him can remain whole because all of them have been bent around his secret right to kill. Then he runs. He is no longer Kira when he runs. He is a bleeding boy in a torn suit, stumbling through the warehouse stairwell, one hand pressed to his side. A few minutes earlier he was still trying to command the room with his voice. Now he is only trying to escape the moment he can no longer control. This is what makes the ending so brutal. Light spent the entire series teaching fear to move outward from him. Criminals would fear Kira. Investigators would fear Kira. Society would adapt to fear and call that adaptation peace. Once he is cornered, fear returns to its source. The man who ruled through terror is reduced to raw panic. Hobbes begins from that same fact. Human beings are fragile and afraid of violent death. Law is supposed to contain that fear by preventing private people from ruling one another through it. Light does the opposite. He gathers fear into one hand and calls it justice. The brief vision of his younger self passing outside deepens the sadness without absolving him. The point is not that he was secretly innocent all along. It is that he was human, gifted, proud, impatient, disgusted by corruption, and already vulnerable to the fantasy that intelligence entitles a person to rule. The Notebook did not create those traits, it gave them reach. Hobbes would insist that intelligence does not make someone safe to obey. It often only makes him more effective in pursuing what he already wants. Ryuk's final act closes the logic with perfect indifference. Light, bleeding and cornered, still wants time, still wants one more turn, one more exception. But Ryuk was never a disciple of justice. He was bored. He was entertained. And when the game ends, he writes Light Yagami's name in the notebook. Nothing could be sharper. The instrument Light used to make himself judge of the world returns him to the condition he spent the whole series denying. He is mortal, and his will is not final. This is where Hobbes cuts deepest. Political order is not meant to make someone godlike. Protect vulnerable human beings from being destroyed by one another's private will. Light wanted something grander and crueler than that modest political truth. He wanted innocence through domination. He wanted peace produced by fear. He wanted to redeem the world by becoming the hand that never had to answer. But no human being can become law without dragging human distortion into law itself. Once judgment belongs to one person, that person's vanity enters it, then resentment, then panic, then the need to preserve power at any cost. Tyranny destroys the people beneath it, but it also hollows out the one who rules. So the ending of Death Note is sadder than simple punishment. We are not only watching a criminal lose, we are watching a gifted mind spend itself, turning talent into domination, then die inside the logic it created. Light is not a misunderstood savior. He is not a fallen angel. He is a human being who convinced himself that absolute judgment could save the world, and in doing so became its worst danger. Hobbes offers the harder, smaller, more humane truth. The purpose of order is not to redeem humanity, but to restrain it. Not to find the purest conscience and enthrone it, but to ensure that no private conscience can decide, alone and without appeal, who may live and who must die. Death Note gives that truth a face, beautiful, brilliant, composed, and emptying the world around him in the name of justice. When one person becomes the law, the world may grow quiet. Crime may fall, people may even say they feel safer. But if judgment comes from one unaccountable will, law has already disappeared. What remains is only fear arranged into order. And that is Light Yagami's tragedy and his warning. He wanted peace. What he built was submission. He wanted justice. What he created was personal rule. He wanted to become the law. And the moment he did, order turned into tyranny. What makes Light linger in the mind is not just that he was wrong. It is that his wrongness begins in a place that feels disturbingly familiar. He sees a broken world, loses patience with weakness, and starts to believe that if he can see more clearly than others, then maybe he should be the one to decide. That is his deepest mistake, but it is also a deeply human temptation. Not the Death Note, not supernatural power, but the quieter impulse beneath it, the wish to stop being one person among others and become the exception. That is why this story reaches past anime, past crime, even past politics, Most of us will never hold anything like Light's power, but ordinary life is still full of smaller versions of the same desire. The desire to judge without being questioned, to punish without understanding, to believe that our outrage is proof of our righteousness. To think that because something is broken, restraint must be cowardice. In that sense, Hobbes is not only warning us about states and sovereigns, he is warning us about ourselves. Order and tyranny is not drawn by good intentions. It is drawn by limits. The question is never only whether a person wants justice. Light wanted justice in his own way. The real question is whether anyone can be trusted to carry justice alone, answer to no one, and remain clean. Death Note answers with terrible clarity, no. The moment one person's private certainty no longer has to pass through other minds, other procedures, other objections, that certainty begins to rot. It hardens, it isolates, it starts calling its own reflection truth. And maybe that is the saddest thing about Light. He was brilliant enough to help the world without ruling it, disciplined enough to live under law, human enough to have chosen something smaller, humbler, and real. But he could not accept a justice that did not place him above everyone else. He did not only want evil punished, he wanted his own mind to be the final shape of the world. That is why his fall feels heavier than defeat. It feels like waste. The waste of intelligence without humility. The waste of moral passion without mercy. The waste of a human life that could no longer bear being human. And maybe that is where Death Note leaves us, in a thought more unsettling than its deaths. The world is not saved when the right person takes unlimited power. It is endangered the moment anyone believes they are that person. Because when one person becomes the law, the first thing that disappears is justice. Appears the lie that it was ever anything else. If this gave shape to something you have been feeling, stay with that for a while. The anime mind is a place to grow while you sleep, and to understand yourself through story. Rest, reflect, and let the ideas settle.